Okay, I'm at the end of John chapter 16, the Gospel of John chapter 16. What is happening is that Jesus is ending the conversation that he is having with his disciples just before he is arrested. After this, in John chapter 17, we have what is considered to be the Lord's Prayer. Most people will think of the Lord's Prayer as when he told us how to pray. But I mean that this is the Lord's Prayer in the sense that this is what he prayed. And John apparently overheard what he was saying to God and recorded it. And so there's a lot that I can speak about in John chapter 17. But at the end of John chapter 16, verse 33, these are the last words that Jesus expresses to his disciples before he is crucified and resurrected. All right, so beginning in John chapter 16, verse 33, Jesus said, "These things I have spoken to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation, but be of good cheer. I have overcome the world." All right, now there are three different topics that are described here in verse 33. The first topic has to do with us having peace, and that he wants us to have peace in him. I've spent a lot of time talking about the subject of having peace in him in the previous messages, and so I don't think I'm going to take the time to try and summarize what I have said previously. I'll just say you can go ahead and listen to the previous messages that I've recorded in the Gospel of John, where I've spoken about the subject of peace. You can even look at some of the specific verses where you can find the word peace, and you could probably pick out which messages you'd want to listen to where I have had things to say about that. But I have spoken about this throughout the messages that I have presented on the Gospel of John so far. The other topic that he introduces here is the subject of tribulation, that in this world you are going to have tribulation. And this is kind of a tough one for a lot of people to embrace. It's a tough one. I'll come back to that in just a moment. I'll speak about that as to why this is a little bit challenging for most people to embrace and to consider, because for the most part, people turn to God because they don't want to have tribulations in their life, and they want to have some divine intervention to protect them from these kinds of tribulations. And so how can we reconcile these differences between what people have and the way that things really are, and the fact that Jesus said, look, in this world, you will have tribulation, all right? This is a real challenge. And then the third subject is with regards to him overcoming the world. What does that really mean to say that Jesus has overcome the world? I mean, in what ways has he overcome the world? Especially when we look at the world and we get the sense that the world could sure use a little bit more overcoming, in many ways. So that's another area that I'll spend some time speaking about, but that'll be in the following messages after this one. In this one, what I'd like to do is I'd like to spend more time talking about this subject of tribulation, that in this world you will have tribulation. And like I said, this is a struggle for a lot of folks, and so it definitely deserves some unique attention. All right, now there is a common belief that people have that if you believe in God, well, then you're not going to have tribulation. You're not going to experience tribulations, sufferings, problems. It's just a belief that a lot of people have. They just make this assumption. In fact, there are some people who I have encountered who have a pretty good life, whereas they don't seem to have a lot of difficulties and challenges and tribulations. And so because they have a life that seems to be okay, one that they definitely don't have any complaints about per se, then they make the assumption that they are close with God. Just because they have a good life, they say, well, of course I'm close with God. Of course I believe in God. Of course God is with me, because you see, I don't have any problems, like you have. And so this is this is an attitude that a lot of people have, which I think is definitely misleading and can be false, that we would define things that way. But this is a belief that a lot of people have, and I think it's important for it to be mentioned and for people to understand that this is just simply what people believe. Now, there are other factors related to this. For example, if you consider the Mosaic Law, the Mosaic Law states that if you will obey God, if you will obey His commandments, well, then you will be blessed. And this is well described, especially in Deuteronomy chapter 28, with regards to the blessings. He lists a few, and then he goes on and he lists the curses. The things that will happen in the event that you do not obey the law as you are supposed to. I'm going to turn to that for just a moment here. Deuteronomy chapter 28. Give me just a moment. Blessings in obedience. Yes. I'll begin in verse 3. Blessed shall you be in the city, and blessed shall you be in the country. Blessed shall be the fruit of your body, and the produce of your ground, the increase and the increase of your herds, the increase of your cattle, and the offspring of your flocks. Blessed shall be your basket and your kneading bowl. Blessed shall you be when you come in, and blessed shall you be when you go out. And then he goes on and speaks about your enemies and your storehouses and other things. And then he goes on and says, well, now if you don't, well, then here's all the curses that you will get. So there is a precedence for this belief that if you are a believer in God, if you are obedient to Him, if you have a relationship with Him, well, then, we would expect that you won't have any serious tribulations. But this is just not the way that life is, and it's just not the way that the world is. And there are conditions associated with this, such as you have to obey all of the commandments and never sin. No one will ever do that, so God never has to deliver. So if any of these things are real in your life, they're not going to necessarily be the conclusion or the blessing that is given to you divinely by God. It's not necessarily going to be the case. He may do that, he may not, but the condition of absolute obedience is one through which no one will ever achieve this, according to the criteria that He established. So in effect, in the end, everyone is going to be under the curse of the law. And this is important for a lot of reasons. Everyone will be under the curse of the law. Therefore, we all need the grace and mercy of God. We need His forgiveness, which is what Jesus is about to provide. All right? So there's this general belief that if you have a relationship with God, then you will not have any tribulations of any kind. And this also shows itself in the opposite sense, that people will judge others by the tribulations that they are experiencing in their lives. Okay? This is another struggle that people deal with. I deal with this one all the time, with the kind of work that I've been doing for most of my life with regards to telling people about the Lord. There has been a lot of success in people's lives, in the sense that a lot of people have benefited from the work that I have done. And it turns out, that there are a lot of people in the world right now at the time that I'm recording this who have testified to this. I've got all kinds. I got 2 or 3 boxes filled with letters that I just keep throwing in there that people have sent me. I've also received a lot of emails that some of which I've posted online with regards to the testimonials that people have shared. That there's been a lot that I have done, and a lot of people have benefited from the work that I have done in terms of helping people clear the barriers that will prevent them, that have prevented them from knowing the Lord for who He really is. But what most people just don't know about, and I suppose don't even want to know about, is that what I have done in a positive sense has been met with an equal amount of opposition in a negative sense. I have had tribulations like you probably can't even begin to imagine. It would take me, I don't even want to try to remember all of the tribulations and struggles that I have had to endure that have clearly been the result of the opposition, the demonic powers who have and continue to go against me to try and get me to stop doing the work that I am doing. Not just the demonic forces, but individuals as well, who have gone through incredible efforts to try and cause me as much harm and tribulation as you can possibly come up with, and others that I could have never come up with, but I learned about. I've endured an enormous amount of tribulation and struggles. And when, it's interesting, when people find out about the difficulties and obstacles that I've had, that in many ways are directly connected to my devotion to the gospel, they stop supporting my work. They just say, well, we don't necessarily want to donate to this guy because, he's not like God manifested in the flesh. He actually has life problems, and many of them are worse than mine, kind of thing. He has struggles, he has difficulties, and so maybe we'll just cut back a little bit on how much we support this guy. We don't want to support him too much because, obviously he's got problems, he's got tribulations, and that just seems to be inconsistent with what we think life should be like. But, that just isn't. Jesus himself said right here, you will have tribulations. Okay, I've got lots of them. There you go. But no, that's not good enough. And that makes my work even harder and harder because I have to do the work that I'm doing, and I also have to ask for donations to support the work that I want to do. Is anybody paying me to ask for donations? No. No. And so when do I do that? I do that on my free time. Oh yeah, free time. Yeah. That's really hard to come by. And so for me to have done as much as I have done, is beyond Olympic in nature. All right. So, but this is how people will relate to me, and they relate to others. That if there's tribulation going on, well, then no, something's not right. God is not in it. God is not with it, kind of thing. And well, folks, I understand that there are a lot of other ministers and ministries who present themselves as if they have no tribulations of any kind. It seems. Good for them. Maybe they don't. Or it could be that maybe they're really not as effective as they promote themselves as being. They just might not be. You have to evaluate these things, in the individual, unique circumstances that they are found. But this is an obstacle. This is a real obstacle in the work that God is trying to do in this world. All right. He said that we will have tribulations. We should expect to have tribulations. And when tribulations show up, people just flee. They run, they just go away because they just don't, they don't want that kind of life, and they don't want the kind of God who would walk through the tribulations with you. Instead, they want a God who's going to intervene in a divine way to make sure that tribulations will not occur. That's what people are usually thinking of. There are a lot of people who turn to God for the first time even, or maybe they will revisit the thought, because they are experiencing tribulations in their life. And I think this is a good thing. I do. That the tribulations of life will inspire a person to think about their God. This is good. The difficulty is that what people are usually thinking is that they're thinking that they need divine assistance in order to overcome the tribulations that they're having, instead of divine assistance to walk through the tribulations that they are having. They want the tribulations to stop, is what I mean. They want the divine intervention to put an end to the tribulations. And this usually happens when they're in a circumstance in life when there just isn't anything they can do. If there was something that they could do, then they would do it, and they don't need to pray to God for his intervention. But when they encounter a circumstance where there's something that they cannot do, there's just nothing that they can do, maybe a health condition, for example, or maybe they're the victim of some kind of manipulation or theft, that's common as well, or deception, or there's been some kind of natural disaster perhaps. There are many tribulations that people experience in life, and instead of going through the tribulations and enduring the consequences related to those tribulations, they call upon God. God, will you come in here and just fix this so I don't have to endure the suffering of being a victim, being a victim of fraud or of deception, of lies or manipulation, or, just because, that was your crime. You trusted somebody. I have committed that crime many times. I have trusted lots of people. And the overwhelming majority of them, when the opportunity came, they violated me to the max and beyond. Why? Because I trusted them. Okay. Now, it doesn't mean that I don't trust people anymore. I do, but I do so with some wisdom, considering. So there are health problems, there are relationship issues, there are decisions that other people make that you experience the consequences for, and you don't even know who they are. They don't even know who you are. It's just a matter of situations and circumstances that happen in life that are totally outside of our control. Sometimes we make really bad decisions and we suffer badly for those. I've made lots of really bad decisions in my life, and I have suffered for those. I have, and I've gone through that, and I'm on the other side of those things. Will there be occasions like this in the future? Probably. I'm going to do what I can to avoid those kinds of decisions and not make bad decisions like I have in the past. But you never know. Tomorrow is a new day. I can deal with today. I can deal with right now. That is what I can deal with. But people make the assumption that God exists to show up and just fix everything and solve everything. And he's advertised in this way too. A lot of people will say that. Come to God and he will solve all of the problems of life for you. He will fix everything. Here's a good way to say it. God has a plan. And people say, oh, well, if God has a plan, well, then let's do it. Let's do it. Let's find out what it is. And let's embrace that. Okay, I'm here. Obviously, I don't have a plan, or my plan's failed. Things haven't worked out. And so they turn to God under these conditions. People advertise God under these kinds of circumstances. It's proclaimed all the time in sermons and messages that people give in conversations and counseling. It's all over the place. All right? And then people go down this path, right? They see this path that is given to them, that people lay before them. Just trust God. Just follow God. Just repent and obey. Oh, yeah, and make sure you tithe, right? As well. They give you the list of things that you need to do, and, of course, the list of the things that you need to stop doing, and then you just go down that path. And what happens is, for the most part, is that these tribulations don't go away. These problems don't necessarily get fixed. Sometimes things end badly. Sometimes they end pretty well, and then people make the assumption that God intervened when, he may not have. And I think that he can, that he will, that he does. I just don't think he does it all the time. And I do not want to make the assumption that he does when he doesn't. So I hesitate quite often to say that this is an act of God or this is a miracle of God. I hesitate only because I don't want to say that he did something when he did not necessarily do it. So I'll say those things when I personally have the conviction and the discernment that presents to me the fact that he definitely has intervened. And then you bet I will say he intervened. No problem with that at all. But people get a little bit frustrated when things don't work out. All right? When things don't work out like they had hoped, now there is a point of decision. Okay? And this is really important to remember. The point of decision. The point of decision isn't when they first announce, oh, I'm now a Christian again, or I'm a Christian for the first time, or I'm a believer in God now. That's not necessarily when the point of decision really happens. Okay, I mean, in many cases it does. I don't want to say that it doesn't. But for the most part, I have seen that the point of decision happens when a person realizes that he's not necessarily going to fix all of their problems. You know, he's not necessarily going to set them free from all of the suffering and tribulations that they are experiencing. The point of decision is either you walk away, or you look to God in a different way. All right? And it turns out, from my experience, I've seen most people walk away. You know, they just abandon the faith. You know, it'll take a year or two, usually, before things work themselves out. And then they just kind of walk away. Sometimes a little bit longer, sometimes a little bit less time. I'm just picking an average of about 1 to 2 years, usually about the 2-year mark on average. You know, some people will go for 4 years or 5 years. Other people will make it 4 or 5 months. All right, I'm just giving you an approximation to understand that this is common. Right? That there is a point of decision where people will say, you know, I don't think that God is real because these tribulations are still a part of my life. I'm still suffering. You know, I'm still experiencing consequences. I still have all of these problems. And they may have gotten worse, or I may have gotten a lot of new ones. And so when people turn to God to solve the problems of life for them, to intervene in a divine way so that they don't have to endure the consequences of other people's decisions or their decisions or a combination of both, and when he doesn't come through, well, then they will easily abandon the faith. They will abandon their God because he's not fulfilling why they turn to him. So that's the point of decision. Are you going to walk away because, you know, obviously God is not going to behave in the way that you thought he would when you turn to him? So you either say that there is no God, which some people will do, or you say that God is mean and evil, some people do, or you say, well, I guess I'm just not one of those special chosen people of God that he wants in his life anyway. And so they just walk away, recognizing, I guess I'm just not one of his. All of you people are good with him, but obviously I'm not. And so why should I stick around here and listen to all of you people telling me that I don't have a good relationship with God because I have problems in my life? You know, which is what happens. You know, this is what happens. And so people, or I have some secret sin in my life, maybe, you know. That's what happens. And people walk away. You know, I mean, they just abandon the faith. And, you know, in some ways, they should abandon false beliefs. And in my opinion, a lot of these beliefs are false beliefs. They should abandon those. But the point of decision is to maybe consider that there is something else to believe, that there is something else that is true. You know, that they should consider that maybe God wants something else, you know, and that's what's hard for a lot of people, is to consider, well, what does God want? You know, what does he want? I mean, you obviously want him to divinely intervene and perform miracles to set you free from the pain and suffering you're enduring. And, you know, I can appreciate that. You know, but what about what he wants? And I'm not saying that in the sense that he wants you to suffer. You know, just because he can intervene doesn't mean that he's evil if he doesn't. That's a hard thing for people to embrace. Just because he does not intervene doesn't mean that he's evil because he doesn't. You need to understand what he wants. And unfortunately, people get so consumed with themselves. People are just so consumed with what they desire, with what they don't want in their life. They're so consumed with themselves that they just don't care about anybody else. What anybody else wants, what anybody else feels, or what somebody else's goals or objectives might be, those things are just totally irrelevant to most people. Those things have no relevance whatsoever. So when I ask the question of people sometimes, what do you think God wants in this relationship between you and him? What is it that he's after? For them, they don't even want to consider the question. They don't, because to them, the question is irrelevant. It really doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter how God feels. It doesn't matter what he wants and what he desires. The only thing that matters to these folks is what they want. And that's the point of decision. Well, if that's how you want it, then you can go ahead and continue to live with the belief in the God who you want to believe in. Or you can walk away from the faith entirely. Or you can turn to him and ask the question, what is it that you're really doing here? What is all of this about? What are your objectives? What is it that you are trying to obtain? Now, there's a lot that can be said about that, of course. I can give you a simple summary of what he wants. He wants people in his life because they want to be in his life. That to me is just abundantly clear, that God wants people in his life because they want to be in his life. All right? Now, there are people who want to be in his life. Why? Because they want his stuff. Because they want him to do miracles. They want him to intervene. They want him to feed them. They want him to protect them from anybody who might cause them harm. And these are not bad things. It's just that you need to keep in mind that there is a lot more that he has an interest in than just making sure that we have what we need. Okay, we have a God who wants people in his life because they want to be in his life, and of course, for the right reasons. And so this is where people make their decision. Are they going to pursue God for who he is? Are they going to just stick with the God that they have made up or that they have been told about that they like? Or are they just going to reject everything entirely? Okay, but for those who will pursue him for who he really is, you're going to have to accept the reality that everybody has the ability to make choices and decisions in their lives. I have the ability to make choices and decisions in my life. You have the ability to make choices and decisions in your life. I can believe what I decide I want to believe, and you can believe what you decide what you want to believe. Now, this is blasphemy, if I may use that word, to a lot of people in the Christian world, which I will come back to in just a moment. But you're going to be confronted with this issue. You're going to be confronted with this, that everyone has a choice. Everyone has a decision. Because he wants people to turn to him because they want to. If you're going to turn to him because you want to, because you really do want to know your God and have a relationship with him and be with him throughout all eternity, and discover all that there is to just begin to know who he is, right? I mean, if this is what you want, then he wants that. That is something that he definitely desires, and he has structured this world in a way that for those who want to embrace that, they can pursue that. It turns out that most people don't. Most people don't want that. Most people won't pursue that. And so there will be very few people who will embrace him for who he is. He gets some, and that's better than none. But most All right? Most are going to reject their God. And yet they are going to make decisions in their lives. These decisions are not going to be a reflection of the truth of God. And so, as you should expect, a lot of these decisions are going to cause tribulations in their lives and in the lives of other people. And this is fundamentally why it seems like there is an unlimited amount of tribulations and sufferings in the world and in our lives. Okay? Because the overwhelming majority of the people are always going to turn away from the Lord. They are going to reject their God. And the consequence of that is going to be reflected in the sufferings and in the tribulations of this world. And then what do they say, right? They say things like, well, if there was a God, he would do something about it. You know? If there was a God, he'd fix it. Okay, well, now think about that for just a moment, please. You're saying that you have caused all kinds of problems, suffering, tribulations in your own life and in the lives of a lot of other people. And you're saying that if there was a God, he would come and fix all these things. And since he doesn't, well, that means there is no God. You know, and that's exactly what they believe. You know, they assert that. People function this way throughout their lives. And so what do? They end up saying, well, then this is what life is about. Life is about perhaps being the one who causes the most pain and suffering and tribulation in other people's lives. You know, I mean, there's all kinds of distorted views that people come up with as a result of this belief. But fundamentally, it does come down to the fact that they don't believe they really don't believe in God. They just don't. They may have a belief in a God, but they definitely don't believe in the true one. And it is reflected in ways such as these. All right. Now, what this means is that the majority of the people in the world are going to be causing problems in other people's lives and in their own. In this world, you will have tribulations, and God is not going to intervene. Because if he was to intervene in a way that would be necessary, all right, if he was to do what it would take in order to stop all the tribulations of life, well, then he would have to force himself on everybody in the world. He would have to exercise a form of force that would eliminate the option for people to decide to turn to him. And so he's going to miss out on what I believe is his primary objective, which is to have people in his life who want to be in his life. If he does anything that interferes with that in a significant way, then I think he's going to definitely cause damage to his own purposes. And I don't see that our God is going to do that. All right, so in this world, you will have tribulations. He said it. He made it clear. The disciples, John wrote it down clearly. Okay, now, like I said, there are people, most of the people are so consumed with themselves that they really don't care. They just don't care what God may think or what God may want. That this is just what's more important is what they genuinely want. Now, there is a question that people will sometimes ask from a philosophical point of view. All right, when they just want to think about the study of God, theology. All right, and the question is, if there is a God, well, then they follow it up with something after that. They will say, if there is a God, well, then these are the characteristics, these are the qualities that he needs to have. Now, when it comes to divine intervention that people are usually looking for, they want him to come in and just fix everything and solve everything. What they're looking for is a God who is all powerful. He's omnipotent. He's going to come. He's all power. He's in control of everything. They're looking for a God like that. If there is a God, well, then he should have total control. There should be no maverick molecule in the universe whatsoever. That's what people will say, as they think about it and they ponder the question, if there is a God, well, then these are the qualities that he should have. Because we make the assumption that if he didn't have total control, well, then he wouldn't really be God. They don't consider that maybe we have a God who has defined boundaries, boundaries, physical boundaries and other kinds of boundaries, to say that you all can make decisions within these parameters, within these boundaries. For example, on this planet, you're on this planet, you have the boundary of time. You're only going to live so long. And you have the boundary of the planet. You're not getting off this planet. If you do, you're not going to be off this planet for very long. You're coming back, okay? So you're going to be here, and you're going to be here for a limited amount of time, and that's a boundary. So while you're here, you can make decisions, and he has allowed people to make decisions, certain kinds. There are boundaries, of course, as you can see that there are lots of things that people cannot do that they may wish they could do, but they can't. All right? They don't have superpowers, for example. So when people are living their lives and they think about God, they will ask the question, well, if there is a God, then he must be all powerful and have all total control. All right? And this is the foundation of the theology or the study of God. And probably the most well-defined representation of this would be that which was presented by the Greeks. All right, going back in history, going back to the beginning of what is known as paganism, which was not just a bunch of people running around, in the forest with the few pieces of clothing on. That wasn't what a pagan was. A pagan was a person who embraced Greek philosophy. It was pagan Greek philosophy. And a lot of pagan Greek philosophy was about theology, the study of God. And this is one of the things that they came up with, was that, well, if there's a God, then he has to have total and absolute control over everything. He has to. Otherwise, he's not as much of a God as we would like. He has to know everything. He has to be omniscient. He has to be omnipresent. He has to be everywhere. That these are qualities that were defined by the pagan Greeks. Okay? Now, you can look at many examples in the scriptures that shows that God does not necessarily know everything. He's not necessarily in control of everything. And he's not necessarily everywhere. He can certainly know whatever he wants to know. He can be wherever he wants to be, and he can definitely be in control of whatever he wants to be in control of. But there are examples to show that the true and living God doesn't relate to people in that absolute way. My favorite example is definitely the conversation that God was having with Abraham about Sodom and Gomorrah. God showed up and he met with Abraham along the way because he was going to go and investigate to find out if some things that he was hearing were true. Well, folks, that gives you the indication that he hasn't been there and he doesn't know and he's not in control of whatever's going on in Sodom and Gomorrah. He decided to allow those people some privacy for a while, of course, and then he toasted the place. But still, he made a decision that there were things that he didn't want to know. And there were places he didn't want to be. And there were some things that he just didn't want to be in control over. All right? So there are examples that we have in the scriptures, in the record that we have, that testify that our God is not necessarily going to relate to people in the way that they want their God to be. Okay? Now, in the Christian world, this pagan Greek philosophy continued. All right? It continued. It was first well expressed through a person by the name of Augustine, who, if you'll check just about any encyclopedia, you'll see an article that says something to the effect of him being the most influential Christian theologian of all time. And of course, there's been lots of people in between Jesus and Augustine. But let's just pick on Augustine because he's considered to be well recognized as the greatest and most influential Christian theologian of all time. And if you check enough encyclopedias, you should be able to find enough examples where they say the reason why was because he interpreted the Bible through the lens of pagan Greek philosophy. All right? That's what he did. He took pagan Greek philosophy and said, this is the truth, and I'm going to interpret the Bible according to these beliefs of the pagan Greeks. All right? Well, he's not the only one. Somebody came after him. Calvin. Calvin was the Protestant version. Augustine was the Catholic version. Calvin appealed to the Protestant people, and he presented the exact same stuff that Augustine presented about who God is and how he relates to us. He even said that. He said that in his own writings, that whatever Augustine said, he believed was true. All right? And where did Augustine get his stuff? He got it from Plato, Socrates, Aristotle. Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Those guys of whom we have their texts, we have their writings that we can read and study right now. I've read through them myself. It's been a while, but I've read through them. And so that's what we have in the Christian world. We have the Catholic version of Augustine. We have the Protestant version of Calvinism. And these beliefs have found their way into just about every congregation of Christians throughout the world, throughout history. It's always been there. And why? Why would it be there? Because it's so easy for people to embrace. It's so easy for people to believe. Most of it is stuff that people want to believe. You might wonder, why would people want to believe this kind of stuff? Well, lots of reasons. Probably the most common and popular reason is because they do not want to be responsible for their own lives. Okay? That's what it comes down to. They don't want to be responsible for themselves. They want God to be responsible for them. They want God to define the plan for their life. They want God to decide what their life is going to be. They want God to decide if they're going to even be saved or not. They do. They just want God to decide. Why? Because they don't want to assume personal responsibility for themselves, to work through the struggles and tribulations of life themselves, and to embrace their own failures, their own sins, the problems that they create. No, we don't want that. We want God to take care of these things. And if he doesn't, well, that's no problem. They just declare themselves to be victims. They're a victim of God. That's what people do. This is the world that I interact with every day. People like this every day. This is not unusual at all. Okay, this is the way that life has been for a long time. And from what I can tell, it's going to continue to be this way for a long time still. Okay? And all of this, comes down to the fact that people don't want to embrace the tribulations of life, and they don't want to have a God who will walk through the tribulations of life with them to help them grow and mature and to know him more in the midst of these circumstances, because he can use these circumstances as opportunities to reveal himself to them in ways that they probably would never see otherwise. And so for those who will embrace him in that way, for those who will, those are the people who will grow to know the Lord. Very few people do that, and this is why very few people genuinely know the Lord. But at least God gets some. So if there is a God, that's what people are thinking. They're thinking, well, if there is a God, well, and then they go on from there. But no, God said, look, in this world, you will have tribulations. All right? And then he has a lot more to say about that from there. Okay? Again, in verse 33, these things I have spoken to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation, but be of good cheer, I have overcome the world. Now, there's a lot more to say about that, about how he has overcome the world, and I will continue with this in the next message. For those of you who are using this for your small groups, I have a question that you can consider using as part of discussion. What are the tribulations of life that draw people to God? All right, that you yourself have experienced, that you have seen other people experience. Maybe you have some stories about this for yourself or for others who you have known, that they experienced some significant tribulations, but because of these tribulations, because of these struggles, they turned to God. And what was their experience of that? How did they walk through that? Did they make it? Did they continue in the faith? Did they abandon the faith? What are some of your personal experiences with regards to this? Okay, and I will continue in the next message. Thanks.